Hi, welcome to the shop. Today I'm decided to do a video on a plane that a friend of mine sent me, and I'll show you pictures of the plane when I received it as we go on here, and you'll see the kind of condition that it was in. Mostly a forgotten plane that hadn't been really taken care of very well. But here you can see the condition of the plane when I got it. And you can see that there's quite a bit of rust on it, as well as on the threads here, and on the chip breaker, and this front part. I'm going to take it all apart and try to get rid of some of the rust, and oil it well, clean it up, sharpen the iron. You can see here that the iron is not quite straight. The clipped wings on it, let's call it that, are not even on the left and the right side. Interesting. You can also see that there's rust on the threads on the advancement rod that goes through it, but we'll go back into it once I've cleaned it up and I can show you some of the parts and how they work. The plane was made by Samuel I Goodall. And that's not to be confused with Goodall Pratt, which was another company that was manufacturing tools in Massachusetts about the same time, but one was Goodall, and this maker, his name was Samuel I Goodall with an A. At any rate, he had a shop in Philadelphia, and he started making wood-bottom planes, transitional type planes. And that was around 1894. He made the planes only between 1894 and 1896 before he got bought out by Stanley. For the longest time would just buy out competition, particularly if there was something interesting about the work that maybe they could have incorporated into their plane making. Whether or not any of that is absolutely true, I don't know. It just seems to be some interesting qualities about this plane here that are similar to some Stanley planes later. At the same time that this man was making planes, another man, Gage, in New Jersey, was also making planes, and he had a similar apparatus on his plane. And Stanley, as I understand it, may have bought him out as well. And then later there was Stanley Gage planes. I've looked in the P. Tampia book for information on them. There's information about Goodall in both, and Gage in the P. Tampia Part 2 book, and also in this older book, which I've had, I don't know, 30 years, which is the Tool Collector's Guide to Value by Ronald Barlow. He mentions the planes, the Goodall planes, but he doesn't show any pictures of them here. But there are pictures of them in the P. Tampia book. So let me get started by showing you this plane. Now, I have done some cleanup on it and sharpened the iron and everything, and I'm going to bring the camera in closer so you can have a better look at it. So here's the plane cleaned up. You can see that I removed the rust from this screw that goes through. Everything here is fairly clean. The japanning on it seems to be possibly a paint rather than japanning, but it's or it could have even been repainted. I don't really know, but it's cleaned up quite a bit. You can see also that what this plane has is a rod that goes all the way through the handle and then is held on with a washer and a nut here, which of course on the Stanley planes they had a brass barrel nut inside here that would give you a flush surface on the handle here. This is the self-setting portion that Gage had originally come up with, and this is very, very similar to it. Also, another difference is that on the Stanley planes, they don't have a bridge rod coming across here. This works on a pressure between this and the rod to hold the iron in place, whereas the Stanley Baileys did not. They had a bolt that came out of the frog. in the P. Tampia book, there's a discussion about this man's planes having a similar frog to the Stanley Bailey's. And that seems to have only been true on his wooden bottom transitional style. They actually had a frog that was very, very similar to Bailey's design, but this does not have that. So let me take it apart and show you more parts to it. So let's examine it a little closer. The length of the plane is 9 3/4, and the width is, it looks to be about 2 3/8 inch wide. The cutter or iron itself is right at 2 inches. And if you look at the profile of this plane, it has sort of a long, sleek profile, with this being lower than the Stanley versions. But you can see that the direction of this tote is not terribly down, and you see you can only fit. This is very tight in this portion here. I imagine eventually it would start to wear on that part of your finger. So it's not a terribly comfortable plane to use. The temptation is really not just to keep this finger out, but maybe keep a couple out, maybe the pinky. It's not terribly comfortable. This is the rod that's going across to the other side here, and those have been peened. So I don't know whether or not they were threaded in or just peened on both sides. I'm not going to remove them just to be able to give that information, but that's the rod. So let's take this off first in loosening this up. And this is the self-setting gauge-like apparatus that I was talking about. So I'm going to set that down, and we're going to take the blade out, the iron, and look at this for a moment. There is no frog in this plane. The iron sets itself on this lower portion and these two ribs here, and then there's this rod that has a groove in it, and that is your depth adjuster. So the iron itself has an add-on of this little bracket here. And so when you put the iron into the plane, that bracket sits in that groove, and that is your control for your depth adjuster, pushing the iron down and back. But it's interesting because they're two different angles. This threaded rod is at one angle, and the iron is at another. So as you push this in, it's actually serving to move it forward, but not really right on that same plane. But it seems to work fairly well. So that's all that there is inside here. The tote is held on with a rod that goes into the base of the plane here, and then has a nut and a washer at the top holding it on. And then in the front here, a similar thing, but it has a different type of screw here. And here's the label. Here's the stamping of the name Goodall here. The mouth is fairly clean, not terribly large. You can see that where I had to flatten the bottom, I've got some lower areas in here and here, but I didn't want to take off too much. I wanted to get it to where it would work all right. So let me put it back together here. So putting the iron underneath there and putting it into there, and then I can feel where it's protruding too far, so I'm going to back this off until the iron comes up this way. Now, there's also a secondary hole here that's threaded. And so I believe that when it was originally full length, you would have used it there. But now that it's been worn down after a century, that's given a secondary hole to put that piece into. So let's look at this cap iron here. it has an adjustment. This is your chip breaker, basically, is this back piece here. And this is, so that rather than like on the Bailey, this is attached to the iron and kept tight. This one is actually on the chip breaker is attached to the cap iron, which is your top piece. And you can look here and see that this possibly is not Japanning, but it might be paint. So your chip breaker is attached to this cap iron on the top, and then that acts as a pressure to keep that iron down. So it just fits in like that, and then you can tension it by turning this. And now still a little bit of a jiggle side by side, and you can also see that there creates a gap back here, and the tighter you make this, the bigger the gap here, but the lesser the gap on the front, which is the purpose of that chip breaker, to take the chip that's coming out and make it move up and not get caught in there. So an interesting feature. Now here's a comparison. I put a number 4 behind the plane, and you can see here that actually this is, they're very similar right here, this height from here to here, but this is a little bit longer than the number 4. And so that, I think, is what gives it its more sleeker appearance this way. Also, you can see while the angle here is basically the same here and here between the two, because this is shorter and without this lever cap here, it again gives you this appearance of length, of it being longer and sleeker. So in setting it up, I'm going to loosen this a little, and I'm going to run this forward. There is not an adjustment on this plane for lateral movement, so you can't, if you want to adjust it laterally, then you either have to tap this or move it like this, but you can see there is a certain amount of play there. So I'm going to snug this up, and I'm going to look down the end of it, and I'm going to bring the iron forward so I can see it sighting down the plane. Now I see it, and I can see to adjust it just a little bit this way. So I've adjusted the lateral. Now I'm snugging that down a little bit, and I'm going to withdraw the iron just so a little bit comes out. And let's see what we've got here. This is already hurting my palm, my webbing here between my fingers. So I've got to find a comfortable way to hold it. And that's probably keeping 2 fingers forward like this. And let's see what kind of a cut we get. Maybe a little too fine. So I'm going to bring this forward a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit of a bite. A little bit more. A little more. Now I'm getting a fair shaving. It's very uncomfortable, this little part here. But I am getting a shaving. Take it even deeper. There we go. Now, in order to get the proper pressure, I'm almost having to push here because this is too low and it wants to lift off the board. So you really have to keep the forward pressure here on it. So I'm getting a shaving. It's a little heavier than I like. But this adjustment, as you use the iron at the plane, it wants to set it off. This tightening, this is very difficult to get it tight enough that it really holds it tight where it should be. So I've had to use this to tap it to get it perpendicular. So let's you can see I am getting a fair shaving. There you go. This is a good surface, but the plane is awkward. It's very light. This knob is too small for a man's hands. It's almost that this would be a great plane for a boy. The same thing here. This is starting to turn this part a little pink here and sore from pushing here. So this is a little too low, and there's really not enough room here to hold it. But I am getting a shaving, and this is smooth. So it's interesting. It's an interesting plane. There are all these planes that when you're out buying planes, you'll find things like this with different apparati that have been designed to hold the iron, and there are different mechanisms, and some were patented and some weren't. Some didn't catch on. Others were bought out by other companies, so they weren't continued to be manufactured. This is a very interesting plane. The system for moving the iron back and forth is interesting. What Gage called a self-setting plane is not really quite this unit, although if you look in this photograph in P. Tampa, you can see how similar they are. But it doesn't do the cutting. The iron is beneath that. It's just really the chip breaker. So, but this guy, Samuel Goodall, at age 39, he started making planes, and at age 33, 6 years earlier, he started working in the hardware business. And in the census between 1900 and 1920, he was listed as a hardware. I've forgotten the name of it, but basically he was selling hardware, merchandiser or something like that. I'll have to look that back up. His son Joseph was listed on the board as an officer with Central Hardware Company, which we don't really know if Goodall owned that company or if he just worked for them. There are guesses on either of those, but we do know that his son later was an officer for the same company. So he had a history in hardware, and he made planes for a few years. And this is one of the oddballs that you'll find at a yard sale or so. And it's interesting because you see, and we're talking about, 100 years ago or more, the interesting mechanisms that these guys came up with to control the iron, to make it cut the way they wanted. And maybe this is not perfect. I'm really hating the handle on this because it's hurting my hand, but this is just another mechanism, and it's interesting to see. So I'll put together this video, and I hope it gives some of you an idea of there being other planes out there besides Miller's Falls and Stanley and Union, the ones that are more collectible. These rarer ones are interesting, and they tell a story about pioneering in tool making in the United States, and another story about the industrialists and how they ate up little companies and became larger and larger, and incorporated some of the pieces into their planes, and otherwise just scrapped planes and things that they didn't think really served much of a purpose. Anyway, thanks for coming in the shop. I hope this was interesting. It's going to go on my shelf as a display piece, not as a user. And I've compared this to the Bailey number 4, and the Bailey number 4 is a lot more comfortable, but this is still a very, very interesting plane. So until I see you in the shop again, everybody take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and have a happy life. Talk to you later. Bye.